All right. I think we're good. I think we're
All right,
launched. I think we're live.
we did it.
It's funny, and we were kind of having a conversation about like social media and video production and everything. Anytime I press that record button on here, I'm like, something's gonna explode. Something is not gonna work. Something's not gonna record. It's gonna be a disaster. But Bromley, man, second time on the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. This
I'm
is
honored.
dude, this is I'm telling you, it in terms of guests on the show that I've had, you're somebody that I can just sit down and have a conversation with for hours and hours and hours because you are such a wealth of knowledge in the training world, in the programming world, in the coaching world, and what you put out is so important for, not even just athletes, but also coaches. I said this to you in the last episode is I will go back to some of your videos and watch them like a few times through because you always bring out like a couple nuggets of information that I'm like, shit, how did I forget this like very simple concept that I shouldn't be forgetting? So what I wanted to do today um, is a little bit more of a deep dive into programming in general. And one of the things that's going on in my life is I'm shifting from powerlifting to back to strongman for strongman nationals in June. So I wanted to bring Bromley on and just kind of dissect that process. How do you go from one sport to the next or one season to the next? What sort of questions, what sort of information that you need to have? And I figured the listeners of this would get a ton of really good information that they could use for their own programming, for their own athletic endeavors to kind of have a better transition from one goal to the next.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, as far as sport transfer goes, you could do a lot worse than starting with powerlifting and moving into strongman. My philosophy on preparing for strongman long term, because I've taken people that are good athletes that I had to get ready in a short period of time for a high level show. You get people that are very strong, are very athletic, very adaptable, but they just don't have the experience. It's like, okay, what do we do there? But then I myself have had to grind 20 years because I wasn't that athlete and I had to figure out how to plan long term to get those slow changes, my foot speed and my coordination and things I
Mm.
was horrible with. So I summarize everything. I tell people that there's two things you have to consider true at the same time. The most important part of being in strongman is being strong. Second, the most important part of being good in strongman is being good at the events. You have to treat them equally as important. There's this stupid debate as far as like what's most important, static strength, how much does that carry over? How much did you emphasize that with new lifters? And if really you should just focus on athleticism. I know schools of thought, camps, some good friends of mine that treat strongman like a field sport, and they
Mm-hmm.
treat athletes like you would see football or lacrosse players go through training to work on that athleticism. They're both equally important if you want to get as good as you possibly can. They both have immense things that they can solve for you. Focusing on one over the other, it requires a little bit of a shift in attention and kind of knowing what you want to get out of whatever mode of training you're doing. And really, the only thing that changes is when you emphasize one over the other, because over a sufficiently long enough period of training, you'll have kind of your generic training, which does a bit of all of it, but you'll have focus periods where it's like, okay, my deadlift sucks. I have to get my deadlift up if I want to be okay in the deadlift, but also okay at anything else. You're not going to load a 400-pound Atlas stone with a 450 deadlift. Like that math doesn't work. But there's also times where it's like, oh shit, I'm 5 weeks out from Nats and it's all moving events and there's no deadlift. So it's like, what am I going to do? Well, you're going to do the events. You're going to work capacity. You're going to work skill. You're going to refine yourself down. And that's where having a basic understanding of basic periodized structure comes in, because periodization, I think, is infinitely more important for athletes than it is for strength/lifting.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know how to peak, how to taper. But I mean, even taking a note from the conjugate system, like they found that you could train in basically this static phase that just doesn't end, where you're doing essentially the same threshold of training day in day out for months and months, and then as long as you put that taper in at the right time, you're recovered. You go in for the meet. So all the stuff that we take information from, all the textbooks, all the old Soviet information, that was all derived from Olympic sports. And it just so happened that they treated their weightlifters the way they treated their shot putters, sprinters, decathletes, and everybody else. So, and I talked to Greg Knuckles about this too. I had the pleasure of interviewing him not that long ago, and he made a really good point. He's like, other sports, you have to juggle a lot of variables, and they have to be stacked in this very right position, this very right order. You have to go through it in order. And lifting, there's just not that many things to juggle. Things just don't change that much. Strongman adds that element, so that's where that stuff really becomes helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because even the past couple weeks, my training has looked just wildly different. And I was actually talking to Nate Harvey about it. It was just a couple days ago. And it's like right after a meet, obviously with powerlifting, it's very different. But like now that I know that I'm going to have to transition back to strongman at a higher level, and it's like, oh, I am so bad at everything except a bench, a squat, and a deadlift, right? Like there's just even just lateral movement, like anything, like any sort of anything out of that plane of motion. I am noticing that I, objectively have gotten worse at those things. And it's like, oh, no shit. It's like I've been specializing for so long for this one particular goal of getting the bench, the squat, and the deadlift up. If it was out of that realm, it really didn't matter to me at the time, right? Now that we're transitioning back to moving events, to higher, threshold sort of capacity work. And it's like, oh shit, like day one, take me through, like, if you had a client that was going from powerlifting to back to strongman, and they had, I mean, it's 7 months, 8 months, you have a long time to kind of get prep for it. What does that first sort of phase look like for them to kind of transition back into those sort of things?
So it depends on a few things before you get to a concrete answer.
Mm-hmm.
The first things I'll evaluate is what kind of prototypical strongman athlete are they? Is this somebody who needs to be very, very strong to make up for other deficiencies? Is this somebody who's athletic? Are they coordinated? I've seen people come in where maybe their lifts aren't really good, but they're tall and they were like amazing ball players in high school and they picked the shit up quick. And even if they took
Mm-hmm.
mid pack in the deadlift or something, it didn't matter because they smoked everybody and everything else. Or you have people like me who are built like a thumb and I'm not that tall and I don't have a long reach and it's hard for me to bend over. So I had to spend a lot of time insulating those weak points. It helps immensely. And my favorite strongman athlete to train is the one that has a contest in mind, especially one with a long period of time, 6-7 months out,
Mm-hmm.
because we can narrow our focus. Generic strongman training for, like, let's say I just want to get good at strongman, I'll do some stuff later. Pretty easy to run through. 80% of the movements that you're going to see in any event, it's going to be some yoke or farmers, sometimes both. It's going to be some type of carrying medley or some type of like front carry or load, and those can be trained kind of similarly. An Atlas stone over bar, keg over bar, a sandbag rod object medley where you have to carry and load it onto something. Um, there's some weird classic events they usually don't pop up that often. Fingal fingers, tire
Mm-hmm.
flips don't happen anymore. They're kind of one-offs. They're not really like anything else. Power stairs, but those are a little more rare, so you don't have to worry about it. So as long as you're doing farmer's yoke, if you're getting practice overhead pressing on an implement like a log axle, the clean is hard, but pressing on an axle isn't really anything special. Circus dumbbell a little bit, and then elevated deadlifts, I would say that's most of your generic strongman training. So that by the time a contest comes up, uh, front carry, sandbag stuff too. Sandbags are great.
Mm-hmm.
Once a contest comes up, that's going to check most of your boxes. So if you got better at those and you're like, okay, I got this contest in 8 weeks, you should be able to pivot into whatever that contest has to offer and have a pretty good skill set that's going to transfer over. Um, if we have a definite contest, especially a big one, you're like, I got nationals in 7 months. I got this time to prep. I'm going to start with what that peak for the meet looks like, and I'm just going to work backwards. And how
Mm-hmm.
much time we have before then, it's just going to determine how many cycles I run through or I have the person run through of kind of generic strength and generic strongman training. The general rule is further out from a meet, you're more varied, you're building more skill, exposing yourself to more different things, training in different thresholds, getting out of your comfort zone. and doing the small constituent things that by itself doesn't look like what you're trying to do, but when you put them together, it makes you better at what you're trying to do. And then closer to the meet, it's you're basically doing event run throughs. So
Mm.
if I have somebody like that, and I think, okay, we have this list of events, I just break the events down, and then how you kind of arrange that across that time period, and how you go from like kind of paying it lip service, getting your toe in the water, to actually going full bore. It's really a matter of timing. It's a matter of the experience of the athlete. And it's a matter of the actual event you're doing, because different events, you're going to want to peak on different timelines. Um, if your grip is horrific, you might have to spend a lot more time doing, hard, heavy farmer walks or long farmer walks. Whereas if you have pretty good grip, your feet are pretty good, you might be able to put that on the back burner and wait till you get a little bit closer to the meet to really dial that in, because you just need to get those those milliseconds
Mm.
of time off, and work on your transition and really clean up your game. So a lot of different variables, but I always just think of, what's the end date, what tasks you have to do, and then I just work backwards so everything moves forward broad to narrow, and that's worked for me.
Now, what have you seen with the athletes and yourself that you've worked with in terms of a peaking schedule? What peaks faster? What peaks slower? What can you kind of carry over for longer durations of time without training as hard or as heavy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's the detailed bits of information you need that are going to allow you to actually put together a comprehensive peak. Uh, I'm trying to think where individual traits might affect things like this, because some people are going to retain skill uh,
Hmm.
differently. I know the movements I can do that are like riding a bike. I can stay away from stone loading for 2 years. If I come back and if I know my upper body, like my benching ability or whatever, is strong, my pecs are strong enough so I can squeeze, and if my deadlift is remotely close to my best, I'm due for an Atlas Stone PR. Period. It's something that is very comfortable. Now, part of it is because I drilled it in the ground. I used to train with Scott Bringle at East West Strength in Costa Mesa, who runs a nasty training facility. I was only there off and on for a couple of years, but most transformative strongman experience I've experienced so far. And Scott is the type of guy that when you show up, he wants to make sure you don't come back, because the people that come back are the ones that turn into pros. And that's why he's had
Yep.
8 pros come out of his place. So we used to do it felt like CrossFit shit, but it wasn't. That's just because I was fat and out of shape. But we would do like stone over bar for just stupid amounts of reps. I mean, people don't like doing a squat or a deadlift for a set of 12. We would do a stone over bar for a set of 12. And it would get heavy enough to where it'd take a few minutes to get through it. And it was just constantly, it almost reminded me of like what the guys have to go through in Bud's training, where you're just a
Right.
zombie and you're just like, it doesn't matter, just keep moving. That's all you have to do. You just have to keep moving. So that just drilled those paths. Anyways, that's me in stone loading. Everybody has that with their own things. Generally, I would say that the quickest things to peak are going to be the things that you have the most proficiency with already. I'm a great log presser. I'm a great stone loader. I can put both of those very close to a meet. And it's just a matter of getting that skill transfer. So everything before that is really just getting stronger. Endurance peaks extremely fast. Uh, if you're really, really, really out of shape, you might want to give yourself a little head start to get your toe in the water, so it's not horrible. But assuming you're just in a marginally decent place as far as your conditioning goes, the conditioning you need for like a bag medley. I mean, I've done these horrible medleys. Like America's Strongest Man last year had 5 sandbags. It was like a 40-foot carry and load on each one, and it started at 250 and went up to 350 in like 25-pound increments. And it might even not sound like a lot to you, but once you have to bend over, lap, pick up, walk with that third bag, that fourth bag, the idea of picking up the fifth bag, you're just like, no, everything burns. You can't breathe. The weight's on your chest. When I started that peak for that specific event, I started about 6 weeks out, and you get a little panicky because you're like, do I have enough time to get good at this? Every single time I touched a bag, I could go a little longer. I could breathe
Hmm.
a little more easily. And this isn't even PEDs or anything else. This is just how fast your body adapts to endurance capacity, how fast you throw down mitochondrial bodies, how fast your red blood cell count increases. And that's why you always look at guys that see this contest, and if they're in your position, they're like, oh, I got to start doing the medley right now. It's like, well, you're not going to sustain this for 7 months. And even
No,
if you do,
no.
diminished returns are going to set in about 6 or 8 weeks. So you're better off getting stronger, building yourself up, and then working on endurance. And then the things that are going to take longest to peak, I would just kind of generally put things that you're not very good at, things you need more work in, things where you want more time to ramp up, build some skill, and then you can start to look at really getting aggressive closer to the meets. Um, and there's some questions in there I have too. There's plenty of things that, I can think about thought experiments like how far out should you put your heaviest farmer's training, or how far out should you put, a really heavy stone load or keg load or something relative to something else, and what individual variables are going to affect that. And there's enough wiggle room where it's something I'm always kicking around in my head. And you're going to find a point where there aren't a ton of concrete answers very specifically, as much as a lot of us would
Mhm.
like. And that's where you just remember that it doesn't matter. As long as the broad scope of your training, as long as it has that arrow that points towards your meet date, and as long as things are arranged in some intelligent fashion where you're not running yourself into the ground and there's structure and order, you're going to be fine. And then you
Mm.
just tweak as you go.
Well, it's funny that you brought up the like the stone loading. Even for my last show, I think I touched stones honestly one time before the show, because it was just something I wasn't like you had said, it's something I've kind of ingrained, and it's just the pattern, and I ended up winning that event, and I was like, that's pretty fucking cool. Like it's kind of a cool, to have those skills that you have worked so much on. And it's funny, I have a story with that too. My old training partners a few years ago, we would just go shot for shot on stones. We'd stand on one side of the yoke and the other. So we just kind of keep passing it to each other back and forth. And it's like, all right, first one to fail, like, fuck you. Like that's pretty much what happens. But it's funny that you mentioned the medleys, like the death medleys and shit like that. And it's the first time you try it, you're like, I'm never going to get any better at this. This is the worst thing in the world. I hate every second of this. And if you can just cross that threshold again and again and again, you're right. You get better every single time you touch that sandbag. You get better every single time you go through that run, because you're like, this sucks, but I can get closer to that fire every time. And again, you just build that up over time. But something
Completely.
I've noticed a lot with uh, strongman competitors, granted, we chatted about this the last time, like the 231 class is crazy strong. Like it's an insane the weights that some of the lighter guys are doing. And now I'm starting to see almost a bigger gap between the top and the middle and the bottom. Is like the top of the charts are getting so much farther ahead than the middle of the pack, right? So
Yeah.
if you're a middle of the pack athlete, how do you start to kind of build up your, I guess it obviously would be strength, it would be endurance, it would be a little bit of everything. It can almost seem overwhelming. It's like, okay, I am mediocre at everything. It's like, how do I continue on and get better and better? It's like, how do you narrow that focus?
So, I mean, if you're mediocre and it's to where kind of everything needs to come up, I'm kind of strong and relative to my strength, I'm okay at these
Mm-hmm.
lifts, but I have room to improve. You would default to a more generic kind of, I guess I would say, off-season type of training, just where you're generally focused, like I said earlier, about working a lot of broad traits on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis, maybe alternating events somewhat regularly to increase the amount of exposure you get with those movements. And then you just go on a good strength progression that's going to focus on upper back strength, pressing power, and leg and hip strength, specifically as it carries over or as it relates to a deadlift. And that's where there's a ton of wiggle room because people like different things. I know like frequency doesn't usually fly in strongman. I can't think of anybody that runs a frequency focused approach, because I think the instinct, especially as you get better and more competitive, you're trying to push the weights, you're trying to keep up. You can't take like Olympian approach where somebody with a clipboard is making sure you're staying right in the zone of RPE, and we're doing a lot of practice touches, but it's very, very easy, you inevitably end up just going hard in the paint. You inevitably end up putting too much goddamn weight on the yoke. And that lends itself to a lower frequency type approach. So that's what you're going to see more than often. The simple one that I write, I mean, you start with the basic skeleton, 3-day a week, and then you add days as you need. One event day, one upper body day, one lower body day. Typically a fourth day where it would be like a second pressing or upper body day. And you can decide if you want to do upper back on that day. You can decide if it's going to be another overhead press, or maybe you want to bench on one day, overhead on another. There's other things you can do. I've also inverted that for guys whose press is fine, but they need more lower body stuff, where you can have a press day and then do log press on event day, and that's fine. And then the other 2 days you can dedicate to lower body development, which if you're farther behind, that might make more sense. And then as far as events, it's just my biggest advice to people that are mediocre trying to get good, which was, that's me since 2006, is one, be very, very clear about where you rank in the pack. Do not engage in wishful thinking. Everybody fucking does this. Unless you are printing off the score sheet after every contest you do and going over where you ranked, how close you were to that threshold, to that cutoff point that would have gotten you a ton more points, and realistically what that gap is. That's the other thing. People look at 3 seconds, 5 seconds, and they think it's nothing. It thinks like, well, I was basically right there. Not even kind of. The amount of improvement you need. Yeah, you need more foot speed. You need more transition time. You need to be stronger so you can be aggressive without thinking about being ultra precise. So be very realistic about where you're falling short. And excuse me. And too many rains this early in the morning. Be very precise about where you're falling short and what realistically is going to be required to bridge that gap. So, and that requires a lot of self-criticism, a lot of paying attention, a lot of obsessing over score sheets and previous placings, even to an unhealthy degree. Outside influence can help with that. You know, go to coaches that don't blow smoke up your ass and tell you how good and wonderful you are. A lot of guys with inflated egos end up thinking that they're better than they are because they're the good guy in their crew, and everybody tells them they're the next big thing, and they show up at a low end amateur show and get their ass kicked. That's a very common thing. So humble yourself. Understand that it takes a long time to turn these dials. And then as far as like more specific actionable stuff, the things you want to focus on to be competitive is being well-rounded. The only way that you get really, really strong and then by default get really good at the events is if you are a rare breed who is extraordinarily athletic or extraordinarily gifted kinesthetically, where you just pick things up quickly. And that's a type of person, but it's a rare type of person. And it's not in your best interest to assume that you're that type of person. Worst case scenario, you go at it like, I need to make up this ground because I'm not that guy. And then it turns out you are that guy and you just end up that much better for it. But there is absolutely no reason to assume you're going to advance faster than you will. Always assume that you're behind. So foot speed, extremely important. You do that with a ton of touches, a ton of sprints. I like doing EMOMs or intervals for farmers, for yokes. I'll prescribe bag sprints where literally it's a light bag. And they're like, this bag's too light. 150-pound bag, it's nothing. And I'm like, no, you're going to pick it and you're going to run as fast as you can for 30 feet. And then you're going to do that every 30 seconds for, 10 minutes. And it adds up. But being conditioned and still having that instinct, like I said, just keep moving to where it's automatic. I'm at the point now, because I've done this for so long, I have short legs. So I'm like, I got to turn that shit over. I'm at the point now where I can't carry a yoke slowly. I'll try to do like heavier, deliberate yoke runs, and I find myself falling forward because instinctively I'm like, move. And that's been a huge asset. And then I get to the point where after 15 years, I got to a big show and it's like, oh, I'm actually as fast as the best guys. So foot speed is a big one. Having a motor is the other one. Do not slack on having a motor. You don't have to do ball breaking, as Liver King would say, blood boiling workouts. You don't have to do these like brutal metcons day in, day out. You don't have to go kill yourself. But maintaining some base of high rep, lower body work, finish your deadlift workout with a token set of 12 or 15. It doesn't even have to be heavy. Same thing with your squat. do some steady state cardio. Nobody, none of the fat shits that claim that they're real strongmen, so they don't do cardio, are above, going and walking for 45 minutes around the block, walking on a treadmill on an incline, riding their bike, going on a hike. Basic shit like that goes a long way, and it makes that transition into endurance work so much easier. I'm trying to be a little more aggressive, so I actually run 2 miles a day. I'm more often doing some of the harder medleys throughout the workout, but I cannot emphasize enough how important having a motor is in strongman, especially given you were talking about that gap that exists between the top and everybody else can be in the middle weights extraordinarily strong. Um, Among the top, probably if you're looking at in the world of like the best active middleweights right now, he's probably in the top 10 of deadlifters. And of course, he's number one overhead press. Statically, the strongest guy. Camby is so dominant, not because of that, because there's a lot of guys that pull more than him and press about what he presses. He is who he is because he's well rounded. He's the strongest guy, but he's also well rounded. So that applies to everything. I go against a ton of guys, and I call these like generic power athletes, guys that are very explosive, can probably jump high, run fast. 15 seconds into anything, they're done. You can say, well, maybe that's because they're super fast twitch. Maybe it's because of the way they train their whole life. Usually people just fall into what they like to do, which is what they're good at. And then it's a feedback loop. Maybe it's because of the gear they're on. Who the hell knows? Trend lungs do not help with strongman whatsoever.
Oh,
It's a bad time. But I have been able to carve out my path against guys who are objectively better athletes than me and objectively way fucking stronger than me because I have a motor. I talked to one of my buddies who's an 850 deadlifter as a middleweight. I think he did for his OSG submission. He tripled 800, or it was very close to 800. and that's Frank Provenzano, and that's without a suit. And Frank is just a nasty deadlift. He doesn't look like he should be able to move these weights. He's extremely strong. But Frank talks about things like Husafell stones. He's like, I can't find a way to get in that headspace. I know what it's like to amp up and take it out on a heavy barbell. And that's everybody's favorite thing. I don't know what it's like after I've been walking for 30 seconds to find that switch that tells you to keep your fucking feet moving because you got points to make up. So temper yourself to it, get used to it. You won't just be a better strongman. Your other lifts will be a ton better, and you will be a more useful human being. You'll probably live longer. So that's my very long roundabout way of talking about what's important for mediocre strongman athletes.
Well, it's something you had mentioned that I think is important is developing the skill, right? So we can develop a skill in an environment where everything is comfortable. It's your gym, it's your music, blah, 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 right? Like doing a Husafell run in your gym surrounded by your crew is one thing. Doing it in a wide open, brand new place surrounded by people that maybe, and that's one of the biggest things about a bigger strongman show is like you have so many people going at the same time and you have motherfuckers like sprinting by you. Like there's so many distractions going on. Like it's hard to kind of get into your own zone when there's so much going on, so much activity. And not only that, I think there is tremendous amount of benefit to training a skill when you're tired or in a fatigue state, like you had said, like your former training partners with like the sets of 12 on stone. You get to a point where you have to shut your brain off and you have to let your form and technique kind of take over because you just got to keep moving. Do you purposefully kind of include some of those sets and reps of the higher reps and just getting people fatigued to try a skill, to learn a skill? Or do you kind of bring that back towards more like a peaking side? It's like, okay, well, we're just going to keep training how we're training it. Because I've seen people that you see it all over Instagram. It's like they do. I had somebody do this in my last show. Like it was just a farmer's hold for time. They're like, they tapped on the judge. They're like, watch this. This is going to be the record. And they fucking dropped it after 40 seconds. And they were looking at their hands. They're like, what the fuck just happened? Like, I did this for a minute 30 easily in the gym. And now I get to the show and I just shit the bed. Do you see that sort of skill acquisition as part of like the higher level guys training or even the people that you work with?
Yeah, because I mean, we're talking about skill acquisition and in the context of fatigue and pushing and lasting, right? So So skill, you generally think of more touches with less effort to refine technique. And then when you're talking about getting into the weeds, when you're talking about building that capacity, you're talking about getting into the suck, which is kind of the opposite. I don't think that you have to wait to get into the suck until you're in a peak by any stretch. It's something that you should experience. The further out you are, I just think that should be applied to more varied things. So let's say you got a farmer's hold. It's the worst event in strongman.
It's terrible.
It's
It's the laziest. Like,
yeah. I mean, look, watching 500 athletes in a warehouse lift isn't a viewer experience for anybody, anyways. But then when you have a static hold, it takes way too much time. It's mind numbing to judge. They just do it because it's easier. There's no setup required. But anyway, and there's with so many more creative ways you can test somebody's grip in a way that's interesting and exciting and electric. Anyways, but you take something like that. You can, I mean, that's one dimensional, so that might be a bad example, but you can just do holds for the entire duration and progress over time and play around with how long and what weights you use and so on. And that works pretty well. But further out, I'd be like, make your grip more versatile. It's good to have, you want your hand well rounded if you want a strong grip, work some extension, do holds with fat grips, do very, very long farmer's walk. And that's one of the best kept secrets for grip strength. Everybody wants to load up and, get that PR where they handle, that exponential jump for like 4 feet. And they're like, oh, I can't believe I held on to that. To take 150 pounds per hand and try to, get 500 feet out as fast as you can. And your grip will absolutely explode. But the basic idea is vary your training further out in a way that's going to point towards that thing. As far as working very hard, like getting ready for this nasty stone load. God, I can think of like car deadlifts that have gone to 20 or 30 reps. They do this stupid, like you were talking about in training, volleying back and forth with a stone. That's a great training exercise. They keep doing that at high level strongman events. They did it at fucking Clash, which was the dumbest thing ever. They do it at Worlds. It is not fun to watch. Nobody wants to watch 5 minutes of stone loading. You have to, and the points don't make sense because they're trying to turn it into a combat thing, but then guys get different amounts of rest in between. So it's lopsided. Anyways, training something like that into the weeds. There are so many things you can do throughout your training at any point in the year that will carry over to that aren't exactly that, to where you don't have to glue yourself to a stone over bar if you're trying to get ready for a stone over bar. Any type of work that gets you into the weeds with a sandbag, anything, long carries, sprints, relays, sandbag to shoulder for reps. You could supplement with a keg. You could supplement with odd objects. There's a lot of variety. So I just recommend people be aware of that and select movements that are going to add some variety without burning themselves out and without being so different that it's not going to carry over. But I think people should absolutely be getting in the weeds throughout the year in some capacity, because like you said, you have to know how to keep going when your body doesn't want to keep going. It's not just about the endurance faculties. It's about the mindset and being comfortable with that suck. And it does get better over time. And the more frequently you do it, the less you have that negative association with it where like it sucked. It's like why people skip leg day. The casual lifter skips leg day because the one time they do it, it fucking sucks and it hurts for 5 days. So they don't want to do it again for a month. So yeah, if that's how you do it, it's going to suck every single time. But then you talk to somebody who squats 3 days a week or squats every day. They're like, I don't even get sore anymore. It's like walking upstairs. It's run of the mill. Your goal is to take the things that other people suck at, that they don't want to do, the things that make their palms sweaty and makes them anxious. You want that to be home. You want to be comfortable there. And you want to be able to watch other people break as you continue to carry on. That is the most accessible thing you can train. And that's why I preach having a motor. Having a motor is one of the most accessible things you can do, that anybody can do. Your in is because other people refuse to do it. It's not because other people have some talent that you don't have. It's not because there's this thing that exists in this other group that you don't have, and woe is me. Other people don't do it because it's hard, which means you can take that and exploit it and get in. So that's why that's such a big deal.
Yeah, and you can make up a lot of points with that too. right? Like and it all kind of boils down to, if you're in a position to do well at a show, right? Like if you're in the top 5% of people and it's like, okay, now it matters. Now the game of points really matters, right? You see, all right, I'm not going to win the deadlift, but I need to deadlift enough to get enough points to put myself in a good position going to my stronger events. I feel like there is a lot of that going on at a lower level too, where they're like, all right, well, I'm just not going to be good at this, and then I'll just be good at this thing instead. But what we're talking about is at a high level. It's like, all right, if I can be within the top 3 to 5 or whatever on the deadlift, then those points can help put me into a good position for an event that I will do very, very well on. But you can't, it's not an excuse to be shitty at that event, right? It's not just be like, you can't just have a token deadlift and then just be like, I'll just make it up on all the other events. It's like, that doesn't fucking work like that, especially at a higher level. The higher up you go, it's a game of like half points. Like you're so close to everybody else that it's who shows up the best on that day that's going to win, right? Or it has the luck of the draw or whatever. You're not talking about a massive gap between the top competitors. It's like, how the fuck can we get a little bit more out of every event to put you in a better position to win at the end, right?
Yeah, and strategizing, I think some people might be inclined to think that there's more day of strategy that really matters. I think those positions you find yourself in are few and far between, where you actually have control the day of over what you do based on some strategy that you employed. Um, Ideally, you want all of your strategies to be taken care of before the meet, so you show up and you do what you do. I'm best when I don't look at the fucking score sheet. If I look at the score sheet, the worst showing I ever had, it was the first time I really thought, oh, I'm pretty good at this. I went to nationals for Strongman Corp in 2018, and I didn't even expect to do very well. There were 3 events on day 1, 2 events on day 2. End of day 1, my training partner, Andrew Mock, who's a good buddy of mine, shout out to Dr. Mock. He comes up to me and he has this grin on his face and he's talking to my wife. He's like, he doesn't know, does he? She's like, what? He's like, he's in first place. And I'm like, get the fuck out of here. It just didn't occur to me that I wouldn't be
right.
mid-pack, right?
Right.
That not only was I don't think I'd ever won a show, because I always bite off more than I can chew. So I'm not content to like win smaller shows. I've done a lot of heavyweight shows I wasn't ready for. I like jumping in. It's more fun. I enjoy it more. But so because of that, I've never really won a show. So ending up in first place and then having 24 hours to like stew on that, I was a fucking wreck. The next day, I was a goddamn mess. And I ended up bombing an overhead event, which is my strongest event. I tanked the circus dumbbell and I ended up dropping to like 11th overall. And it was this big day. It's like, that should have been in the bag. That should have been my pro card. Anyways, I know my psychology. That strategizing is detrimental to me. And people talk about Brian Shaw being so cerebral. Like, he's not cerebral. He's picky. It's like when arm wrestlers are on the table and they're making a big deal. It's like, no, I can't see my thumb. It's a way. It's a way to assert your position and to like. It's psychological. It's like being picky is not the same as being strategic. Now, where this strategy does absolutely matter is in your training. And like I talked about before, understanding where you're hemorrhaging points. You want to talk about that game of points? If you do enough contests, you evaluate those score sheets after the fact, you know which events hemorrhage points. You know which events, like if it wasn't for this event, every single contest I would have placed 5 positions higher. Every single contest I would have podium. If it wasn't for this one fucking thing, your only job is to fix that thing. If that's the difference, because getting your strengths better, and this is also where I struggle with a lot of these guys that are stupidly talented that can do so much and they just want to make their strength stronger. Like, yeah, you should do that, but not at the expense of everything else. I was a very, very good overhead presser very early on because I enjoyed it. I did more military pressing than benching when I was younger. I have very short arms. It clicked a lot faster. And then because I got good at it, I trained it more. It got to the point where I would win the overhead press event in a pro-am. I was like 19, 20, 21, and a show where there's a pro card up for grabs, I would beat guys from all across the country, but then I would like zero the car deadlift, but then I would like tank the farmer's walk. So looking back at all those things, I actually had to take my strong event, put it on the fucking back burner. My overhead press I haven't had a true overhead press PR in about 6 years. And my overhead press right now is probably worse than it was a few years ago, even though I'm a much better strongman athlete. And that was very much deliberate, because on my worst day, I'll take second or third at a high level show. The difference between adding 20 pounds, the difference between adding 100 pounds to my overhead press, I could have every overhead press record that ever existed. It wouldn't improve my placing at these shows one bit. So I took that attention. I maintained. It's the last thing I peak. 3 weeks out, I start doing heavy overhead pressing and I'm fine. Deads, foot speed, conditioning, transition, skill, timing. That's everything that I do getting ready for it. And that made the absolute biggest difference in that game of points and making up ground.
Mm. Yeah, and you see it a lot with deadlifts, right? Like you have somebody. People forget that even at a max deadlift, a max deadlift event, you only have to beat the other people around you. Like if you deadlift 800 pounds, and the next competitor under you only could deadlift 7, why the fuck are you going for a PR on your deadlift that day? As just beat them. Just beat them.
Yeah.
Do 705. Get the fuck out of there. Get the first place for that event and move on. Save some in the tank, right? So, and it's funny to say that, and funny to see that happen. It's like, oh, I pulled 800 at the show. Oh, that's awesome. Did you win? Of course I did. Oh, by how much? 150 pounds. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like, you didn't have to, like, it's just the ego. The ego kind of trickles in a little bit. But
and
I wanted to
you get 1 point. If you won by
it's worth the same.
You get one more point, right?
It's
you
worth the same.
Your wide, you get the same point, but now you're worse for wear. So
yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to get your opinion and kind of shift gears on the topic of cutting weight for a show. I imagine you've worked with a lot of athletes that cut weight going into a show and they want to compete at a certain weight class. Where and at what point? Obviously, it's going to depend on the type of athlete. If an athlete's just overweight and needs to like lose body fat to get into a more competitive class, that's one thing, versus being 10 pounds out, 12 pounds out, and just needing to cut some water weight. At what point in your training for an athlete, in a very, in a general sense, does weight cut begin to like kind of poke its head into the training process?
So, to my chagrin, it pokes its head in from square one, because it's like the first thing that everybody brings up. So I get a new athlete onboarded, and the first thing is, well, how much do you weigh? Oh, well, where do you compete? And there's this big gap, right? Now, the best at any given weight class are going to fill out that weight class. Camby walks around at 250, 255. I've cut from 265, and I know guys that have done that as well. And that's where, and look, there's fighters that walk around at 180 that'll cut 25, 30 pounds. So I'm a big boy, I'm a little fatter. I got a lot. That's not quite as much percentage wise. So, it puts in perspective how much water you can actually dump if you hate yourself and you're willing to suffer through that. But the overwhelming majority of people, and I hate that this is what weight class divisions and the infinite amount of divisions that occur every like 8.5 pounds or whatever. Every 5 kilos, there's a new weight class. So people get to just really obsess over exactly where they're going in. New people need to worry about getting closer to what their ideal body is. They need to forget about competing, forget about other competitors, forget about the weight classes as they are now, even though that's the first thing you want to look at. It's like, how do I get a lay of the land and kind of work around to set myself up for success? You need to look at your frame, the qualities you have, what your body fat composition is, how easy you think it would be to turn that around, how much mass you can potentially put on your frame. And only when you do those calculations, you get a ballpark of what you should be striving for. But I'll get guys that are, 6 foot, under 200 pounds, and they want to train to go into the 181s. And I'm like, no, like what? Like, no,
what do you, cut off a leg?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah. No. The point isn't to grow and become a better physical specimen and to be able to, as it were, shoulder bigger burdens. The point is to just infinitely make yourself smaller and smaller so you look bigger by comparison. And people we take for granted the negative effect that weight classes have had on strength development. There's a lot of people that would look better, be stronger, be more capable if they stopped worrying about weight classes and just worried about getting their ideal physique. Now, if I'm looking at an athlete and they reach out and they're like, "Hey, I'm trying to get to this weight class. I got a guy right now who's actually doing US Nats. He hit me up. He weighs 195, wants to cut to 181. I don't think he's overly tall. Look, he's pretty strong for his size. I'm like, that makes sense. That's an appropriate move. High level show. So a weight cut's warranted for a high level show, especially if you think you can do well and you're within striking distance. I'm like, and he was worried he was starting to climb over 200 pounds. And I'm like, you could be 205, 12 weeks out. I can cut 5 pounds, 8 pounds off of you without sacrificing strength, very slowly and deliberately. The last is a water cut. We have a way of doing that to where all of the water comes off in a very short period of time. You weigh in and then you rehydrate. You got 24 hours, you're fine. In fact, you should be better day of because of super compensation. So it's just like programming for events. I always start with the water cut and I'm like, all right, what do we think we can get off you with the water cut? How much is left over? And that tells us what's realistic, because how much is left over is going to be, okay, are you really overweight and we can diet this stuff off? Or are you already pretty lean and you're just trying to fit into a weight class that your form doesn't fucking support and you need to commit to leveling up because that's the only way you're going to be an actually threatening athlete. So it's a bit of individuality there. I just strongly recommend newer people not obsess over it. In fact, I recommend you don't concern yourself with it. Get an honest assessment of your body fat composition. If you're 20% body fat, don't even think about doing a water cut. Just go on a diet. Get yourself lean. If you want to be the best, because people will cut weight, but people won't go on a diet for 6 months. If you want to be the best, you have to have more mass. You have to have less body fat, and you're not going to just constantly wring yourself out like a towel to be competitive. You have to transform your body. So focus on transforming your body. And look, if you're 6'3", 6'4", then that question has been answered for you. So don't worry about it. Eat, get bigger, fill out your frame. Rare exception, you get like the Andrew Mock's very tall, Andrew Clayton's very tall, but those are exceptions to the rule. Most of you guys that are under 6 foot will probably be better suited in middleweight category, unless you have a desire to be an absolute mass monster, which some people do. More power to you if you do. But yeah, I don't like when people just focus. They continuously niche down. You got to start looking up. Look up to heavier challenges.
And it is it, and to do a water cut, it sucks. It sucks real bad, right? But and you're right. Like there are a lot of newer athletes that are fixated on it. It's like majoring in the minors, right? It's like the water cut should be, if you're at the level where you're water cutting, it's like that should be pretty much an automatic system at this point. It's like you almost know what to do already. Like how to rehydrate, you have the systems in place to do it well. If you're a newer athlete, if you're somebody that's just getting into the sport and you have to ask the question, it's like, all right, how do I water cut? It's like, probably not the time, probably not the place. Right. And it's funny because because I walk around at anywhere between like 215 to 220 ish. So I'm right in the middle, like right in the middle of the 231s and like 200, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm kind of in a weird spot. And what I've noticed is the times that I've cut weight, I've done well, and that's great. But if I would have just competed a weight class up, I might have even done better. And even like the weights would have been more manageable. Yes, they're a little heavier, but like I think I would have been in a place mentally. I'm very similar to you in that regard. If I know going into a show is like, all right, I don't give a fuck about winning. I'm just trying to crush as much as I possibly can, do what I can, do the underdog thing. There's like a different energy that comes out of you. It's like you're now in a better alignment for the competition than if you're trying to like nitpick points here and there. It's like, just fucking get there and just do the best you possibly can. And then just see how it shakes out. See how that shit shakes out in the end.
It's so much better. And that's true. And that's a good point. People initially starting in competition is great. And I'm a big fan of competition. Very critical of people that downplay competition or see it as being something that's toxic or whatever. I think there's a way to do it in a toxic manner, but that's where sportsmanship comes in. But people getting into sport and being competitive, and the first thing, like you said, nitpicking points. The first thing is like, it's like, okay, well, you're going to place bottom third at nationals, and you're doing this because you got an invite and you're excited, and it's your first nationals. Not you specifically, but this hypothetical person. Mm-hmm. You're going to place bottom third at nationals, and all these things you're doing to nitpick these little point placings, cutting weight, fidgeting with your weight, trying to keep your size down, trying to keep your mass down so that you can stay within ballpark. If you have all of this real estate in front of you, all of this area that you haven't filled out, if you have room to go forward, it just works completely against you when you start focusing down like that. Whereas when you do go in and you have no expectations, you know that, okay, well, I'm not going to win, but I'm going to crush it. I'm going to go in and do what I can do. When you have that freedom of expectation, performance is so much better. I think it teaches you so much more. And I think more highly competitive athletes come out of that mindset. And like I said, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy doing shows that are way out of my league. I've done a lot of heavyweight shows, and the heavyweights are just on another level. I'm 5'10", 5'9.5" after years of walking with yokes. Probably shrunk a little bit. Short arms and legs, not muscular enough to make up for it. There are a lot of disadvantages when you're looking at these guys that are 6'6" and they can, take some 3 strides to cross a 50-foot course. There's a lot of disadvantages there, but that is the only reason I've been able to accelerate my improvements, is because I'm playing catch up. And then by the time you stop and look back, you're like, holy shit, I'm in a much better spot. Big difference between looking down and looking up. And that's the thing that I have trouble with. People spend so much time looking down. They look at smaller ponds to fish in. And it's like, that doesn't do anything for you. That violates the basic tenet of sport, that is supposed to, it's like, okay, yeah, if you're a white belt, stay with the white belts. But the point is to fill out these other classes to get experience and grow and develop. And that's missed in a lot of people. I could get into that with like the culture and the business model and how it selects for a certain type of mindset that's very different than team sports and other sports like that. But yeah, I think as long as people are going in just trying to get the most out of themselves, and they have an objective idea of what they want to be independent of what the weight classes are, as long as people are doing that, you should notice nothing but improvement year to year.
Yeah. And I've noticed that being like a middleweight, looking at the heavyweight numbers, it's like realistically, if you want to be a competitive middleweight, like you should be able to do what the heavyweights are doing anyway. You know what I mean? Like it's like you're looking at a show, you're looking at a log press, and it's like, okay, well, the heavyweights have to do 300 for reps. It's like, as a middleweight, it's like, yeah, that's a substantial weight. But if you're constantly, like you had said, competing up, if you're constantly putting yourself in that position, shit, I would love to be the smallest person in my training group, surrounded by mutants, because now you have that. It's like the whole idea of the 5-minute miles. Like once somebody ran it, now everybody else is running it.
Yeah.
If you see your training partners pushing you and doing weights that you're like, holy shit, like those are serious numbers, you start to kind of assimilate their habits that has led them to that point, and you start to kind of see those numbers as attainable. That was one of the best things about training powerlifting with the crew at Elite and the people that came in. It was like the numbers that were commonplace, as soon as you step out of that place, you're like, oh, these are big fucking numbers. These are real big fucking numbers. And that was one of the best experiences, is being the weakest person in the gym. Is like, oh, cool. I get to really just focus in on improving my ability to do these things over the course of time. No one's expecting jack shit out of you. No one's expecting you to hit any certain numbers, whatever. So when you start building and kind of becoming part of that process that, that they have been doing, you see such tremendous positive growth and positive change, because again, it's like, you just get to learn. You get to learn and experience and just go through the process and just become better. You don't have to worry about like you had said, the points, the this, the that, the whatever. It's like if you just roll into a show confident, feeling good. Well, feeling good in and of itself is one of the best keys to having a good performance. Because if you're going in, you didn't get a good refeed, you didn't put the weight back on like you should, you're shitting your pants because your body doesn't hold on to anything. Like you're never going to reach your potential at a show, regardless of how good you are. Like showing up day of, feeling good, being prepared is such a game changer. And I'm sure you've seen it at the highest level is like the guys that are hobbling in with an IV sticking out of their arm, trying to get their weight back on. It's going to be a long day versus someone that just kind of rolls in, is confident, is feeling good, and is has that confidence knowing that they put the time and the effort and work in, right?
Yeah, yeah. And in addition to the wear that trying to walk that razor thin line to be as competitive as possible brings, that also brings with it a lot of expectations and a big mental burden that makes the whole experience a lot worse. I could go into a middleweight amateur contest. Let's forget about the cut. If I'm competing against other amateur middleweights, I know there isn't anybody good there. The expectation is that I just slaughter it. That makes it a horrible experience because, I have everything to lose, not a lot to gain. If you win, it's like, well, you should have won. If you lose, it's like, oh, well, so-and-so caught you on this, this, and this. Um, God, you suck. Like it's so much more anxiety. The simplest contests and the competitive ones where I put in this long prep and I'm like, I'm chasing this pro card or I'm chasing this title or this placing or whatever. When you can remove yourself from that and just go in and do it, when you go in and don't expect anything. You're not trying to be the most advantaged. You're not trying to game the system. When you go in and you just experience it, it's so much better. And I always perform so much better. I competed at the Fit Expo. It was Larry Wheel's first contest that he did. And I went in as a heavyweight. We went heads up together on the Farmer's Walk as the first event. And that was one I bulked up for. I think I walked in 272. It's about as heavy as I get. I think I've temporarily been a little heavier after a full all you can eat sushi excursion. But I was 270s, which is heavy for me. I'm usually 250, 255, bloated, big face. I have my beard like down to my chest. But I knew going in, I was going against like Jose Baez, really good from San Diego. He was there. There were some other guys, Victor Beebe. I remembered some guys that were monsters. And I'm like, I'm not here to place. I'm here to see where I stack up against some of these up and comers. I'm here to see where I stack up against one of the strongest influencers to ever walk the planet. And it was one of the best experiences I ever had because I didn't worry about shit. I had no anxiety, no shaky palms before I'm trying to get my shoes tied going into the log press. So it was really great. And I think that's a really important takeaway to the psychology of mental prep. Not everything needs to be you trying to reach to get that extra 0.5% improvement so that you might have this great victory. Most people listening to this that want to get into strongman, make it enjoyable. Make it something that feeds you, and you'll learn as you go. There is no right way to pick up these lessons so that you're in a good spot when you actually are competitive. It's just by virtue of being around, talking to people, figuring out what works for you. You'll get it together. But yeah, you just got to foster that passion, that drive, and get the most out of the shows that you decide to do.
Now, have you always had this sort of a growth mindset, or is this something that you've kind of developed over the course of time?
I think I've always had it. When I was younger and I started kicking this around, like so many people, it's like, well, I'd love to be a world's strongest man. And I get conflicted because I am a weight class competitor. That's where I'm comfortable. But as a fan of strength sports, I also know as a spectator how little I care about weight class performances. That's not to say I don't care at all, but there's a big push that the other divisions, like you go to OSG. OSG is a great show. It's a great time, but it's strongman summer camp. That's what it's,
Mhm.
athlete summer camp. Yeah, they get some big names there. They even got prize money and they got some sponsors, but it is a warehouse with 400 people. So yeah, it's cool. You get Hollins and Zadrunas and Felix in the Masters division. And you get a bunch of up and comers in the Open division, and they're fighting for a Giants Live qualifier or something. A lot of talent, a lot of good shit going on, and God bless them. They do the best they can to televise the whole thing. They got 6 lanes running at once. They got Laws commentating, who's really good. They do the best they can to make 500 athletes watchable over a weekend, and it's still not watchable. So I look at the weight class. I look at the smaller divisions. I think those should exist. I think it's great that they exist. I also think that they are not going to be the open heavyweight men's division, or as the rest of the world knows it, just world's strongest man as a sport. And I think that's okay. And there's a lot of discussion from like female competitors. Women's divisions have blown up, and I would not be surprised if there is a similar analog as far as a women's world's strongest man making a resurgence, because it was around for like a year or two on ESPN like 20 years ago, and then they scrapped it. But if that got bigger, if the Arnold and the Rogue Invitationals got bigger with the women's division, I could see that existing. But as far as the weight class, people don't have that attention span. And like I was saying, strongman is a sport, more so than a spectacle. Powerlifting tends to lean into the spectacle side of things. Not a lot in the terms of an X factor, a game day X factor that's going to give you the edge. You know who's going to place. Assuming somebody doesn't get sick or botch their weight cut, you know who's going to win going in. It's pretty much set. It's consistent among the best guys there. Strongman, however, is a sport, and the watching, the spectating, the excitement of it is what is really appealing. And every weight class you add to that detracts from that. And as a guy who's 231, only 231s I know are the ones that I'm competing against at the next show. Ask me who the best 198s are, 181s, couldn't tell you. And that's true for other weight classes. The best 175s, they know who's in their class. Ask them who the best guys are 2 classes up. They probably don't know, except for maybe 1 or 2 names. There is a limit. Our attention is a scarce resource. There's a limit to what we can pay attention to. So given that I've always had that bias towards the big show, and I think that's how it should be. It's like every other sport. The best athletes are the ones that kind of pull attention, and everybody looks up towards them. They're putting up the biggest feats, and they're also showing what's possible. That's what gets everybody excited, and that's what brings in spectators. That should be a staple. I put special emphasis on trying to get as close to that standard as possible if you are serious about getting stronger. And I have a very unpopular opinion too. I get a lot of shit over this. I think if you're going to be, it's not to say that there's no value to being good in your weight class. It's not to say that there's no value in having good strength to body weight ratio, but the degree to which people prioritize strength to body weight ratios in strength sports has gotten fucking ridiculous, to the point where I have a video on strength standards I put up that I did very well. And it was just, hey, these are, as you go through your journey from first day in the gym to veteran to competitor to world class, this is how people are going to look at you different based on what you hit. This is kind of giving guys an idea. Well, this is what your first 3-plate squat means, to put it in perspective. Remember the first time you get 315 on anything, you're like, oh, I'm strong now.
Mhm.
So I thought it was very helpful. And I made a point that I wasn't going to do it for weight classes. 1, because my goddamn whiteboard wasn't big enough. And 2, nobody would watch it, because really nobody cares. You can't sit there and watch, like they have a spreadsheet for USPA, I think, that we used to obsess over, where you have all the weight classes, men and women, class 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know what all the rankings were, elite, masters, whatever. It was just number soup. There wasn't anything meaningful to get out of it. I mean, it made sense. It was logical. Everything was graduated and incremental. And if you're in that class, it gives you something to chase. But nobody gives a good goddamn about those numbers. Now, when you tell somebody, hey, I can press 500 pounds off my chest, that is a rare feat. That is a feat that is very hard to get to, regardless of how big you are. That is a feat that says a lot about your physicality in respect to every other human being you're going to encounter. So the typical internet response is, yeah, but that guy's 300 pounds. That's not even double his body weight. That is a very toxic mentality. That mentality has led to a lot of people being under-muscled and weaker, and actually not just weaker, less athletic, less physically capable, less aesthetically pleasing than they could be. So I take huge exception to that. And I struggle with it because I understand that weight classes have a role. I don't think they should be abolished by any stretch. But the way people romanticize being really, really good in really, really small weight classes, it's like pound for pound, the best fighter in the world still gets knocked out by a mediocre heavyweight. Yeah, you can say you can look at a Pacquiao or a Mayweather and say you can be impressed at the skill, precision, especially they're in a competitive class and they're so far ahead of everybody else in this competitive class. Big discussion to be had there. A lot of respect to be given to the caliber of those athletes. Mediocre heavyweight knocks them out. And you see this every time a fighter tries to go up. I remember McGregor tried to go up a weight class and he looked like he just ran a marathon. That extra weight, he was gassed, he was tired. And fighters will talk about that. It's like that extra mass you have to, anyways. So it's the same analogy. I think if you're going to follow strength sports, body weight is an asterisk. It's something that you add on to the discussion as you're drinking some beers and evaluating different guys. Like, oh yeah, Rob Kearney is a lot lighter than a lot of the other guys, but he's still one of the best pressers. Like, damn, that's interesting. Oh, Alexei Novikov walks around under 300 pounds. Like, holy shit, and he's as good as he is. That's impressive. But then to say something like the person who has literally stood up with the most weight of any person in all of human history. Well, I mean, he's big. He should be doing that. It's like, the fuck out of here. I mean, nobody's saying that about marathons and swimming. Like, nobody wants to watch the fat man division in marathon running. Nobody wants to watch that. It's like, if you want to be good at this thing, you got to rise the occasion. That means you got to train, you got to change your body. And that's how you get the best result. And that's how you get the most out of this. So that's my old man yelling at the sky rant about.
Well, it
about
is.
That.
It's funny because I having spent the last just about year strictly with powerlifting stuff, you see that everywhere. It's like, yeah, but what did you weigh? What weight class were you in? Blah 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 blah. Because it's all like you said, number soup, right? It's all about just trying to make yourself feel validated. I think among everybody else, right? And I one of the strengths that I have is being able to be like, wow, I'm not very good. That's all right. Like, I'm still gonna do this. I'm still gonna fucking do this thing.
That's a superpower,
because it really is. It's interesting to see because that, like you had said, when you were competing in the same lane as Larry Wheels there at that show, like, you're like, yeah, that's fucking fine. Like, I still want to do this thing, even though if I'm not the best in the world at this thing, right? Like, whatever it may be, strongman, powerlifting, whatever, it's okay to just not be that good. And that's why we're doing it. Like, that's why we're training. That's why we're practicing. That's why we're getting better. And I think having the mentality of like, yes, you can judge your performance on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shows, but like, where are you 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? Like, that's why you see a lot of the higher end strongman competitors, the world's strongest man, is like, they're 40s, they're 50s, like they've been doing this for a very long time, and they're just trying to build a little bit more every single year, get better and better and better and better, and it's there's no end, right? Like that's like one of the biggest points is like, there's no end to this, like strength. The idea of like, all right, I am the best 198er in the world. It's like, yeah, but you can get stronger. Like, you can get bigger. You can continue to grow. You can continue to develop or whatever. And it's like, how long can you ride the train of being the best at this one niche and a niche and a niche and a niche, and then like try to use that for your own ego to try to inflate like how you feel about training. It's like, you're never going to be, there's no done. There's no fucking finish line here. Like, you always have to get better.
Doesn't it seem logical that if you are a competitor and you do have that kind of running through your veins, if you have room to go up, that you do, right? That's kind of what makes sense. So you're right. There's guys that they have gotten very, very good in their division, but it still stands out to me that they pigeonhole themselves. I had the pleasure of interviewing John Hack a month or so ago, and it's kind of an incredible thing to be like talking to like the Michael Jordan of your sport, right? Like this is literally and again, as a guy who's critical of weight classes, I recognize John's accomplishment just as statistical evaluation of how far ahead he is of everybody else in pure numerical terms. He is, I think you could say, the greatest powerlifter of all time. If you compare his feats to Coan, who everybody gives that to, the things he's done that was better, that was more impressive, that was done at a lighter weight class, that was done without supportive equipment, whatever. But John, it's funny because he's very laid back, right? Very, talks kind of slowly. Doesn't get gassed up before lifts, which I love. I love that he just walks up, looks at the bar, bent over, and picks it up. Um, and he's also very focused on being comfortable. He knows that when he goes up in weight, when the dose goes up, you start eating more, you feel like shit. And I'm like, dude, you walk around at like 215. I'm like, 215 isn't big. I'm like, yeah, give yourself a year to like, fill out another 10, 20, 30 pounds. Give yourself time to acclimate. It'll feel fine, especially if it's not just bloat because you just started eating top ramen 5 times a day and, carrying around Hershey bars with you. If it's not just bloat from salt and carbs and gear, he has so much more room to grow his frame. And it makes you think, and this is where the debate, or not the debate, I guess the discussion happens around what is possible. And it's the fanboy in me that wants to see this train go all the way off the tracks, because I look at him, I look at Browner, I look at Woolham. I mean, you got Browner doing the deadlift world championships. Browner is a mutant deadlifter. He is built to deadlift. And he is also very, very strong on top of that. That's how you get the best in the world. People think when I'm talking about leverage advantage, I'm dismissing what they've done. You become the best by having all the advantages and being the best everywhere else. Like that's how you get, and that's what he is. And I look at him and I'm like, okay, this guy is realistically going to stand up with 1,000 or close to it, weighing in the mid 200s. And that's conventional. That's a guy who's a sumo specialist and he's going to do that shit conventional. What happens when you take a Jamal Browner and get him close to 400 pounds? What happened? Because there a lot of really shitty athletes have gone that route and gotten really strong for it. Glenn Ross. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was God, I can't remember. He's from the UK. I can't remember if he's Irish or Scottish. I'm gonna get roasted for that. I'm gonna get absolutely roasted. But he was a big figure. He's known as Big Daddy. Immensely fat, morbidly obese, every time I would dirty bulk and I'd take down a liter of chocolate milk after a workout because of the gains, I would think about Glenn Ross, because Glenn Ross used to be a bodybuilder and he has these pictures of him shredded, just peeled. And then you look at him later, he's like 35% body fat, just immensely big. But all that growth got him really fucking strong. So anyways, I think like take that to the nth degree. Have a John Hack. The hell, have him gain 30 pounds. Have him not even go full dumb with it. Just have him gain some weight. And I'm like, yeah, the bar has so much more room to climb. It's just a matter of who's willing to do it and who's willing to solidify that territory.
Yeah. And it's funny, you can tell a lot by having that conversation, and you can kind of determine what somebody prioritizes when you talk about a John Hack. And the first thing I think of is like just like you, is like, if he had 50 more pounds on him, holy shit, it would be a superhero. Like it would just be unbelievable, as opposed to like, yeah, but what if he weighed less? You know what I mean? It's like, no. And the idea
nobody wants to see what John Hack does at 165. Nobody gives a shit about what John Hack can do at 165, right? And that just proves the directionality that where we all need to be looking.
Yeah. And to kind of bring it back to the Ed Cohen thing, is like, I've interviewed Ed. He's an amazing human being, but he himself would say like, people should be getting stronger. Like people should be getting better. People like just with information, knowledge, better drugs, better training, whatever. It's like the trend should be stronger, faster, bigger, more powerful over the course of time. It shouldn't be, nope, 1993, that's as good as it gets. Like that's not how that works. It's in ask any of the old timers, it's like they should be getting stronger. They should be getting bigger. They should be doing these things, you know what I mean? And kind of pushing the needle in a new direction. And we should be finding people that are just freaks. And we mentioned this last time is like, God forbid if like a real NFL athlete comes in and starts playing around with strongman or powerlifting and takes it seriously as much as they do in the NFL, we're all fucked. We're all so fucked, because you just see these absolute crazy athletes do amazing things. And it's like, we don't even know where these sports could go, is because we keep trying to like close people out from competing and close people out from, participating. You saw it with, I don't know what it was, like CrossFit used a log press in like an event they were doing or whatever. And like the strongman community was like split. They were like pissed off that they didn't invite strong women competitors or strongman competitors. And it's like, you just gave these athletes a log that they've never touched in their lives, and you're like, go. And they were figuring it out like on the fly. That was the coolest shit to see, because it's
Absolutely.
like, you know how long you've spent training the log to get to where you were. And it's like to see these people just be like, all right, this implement, put it over your head, go. It's like, holy shit.
There are corners of the strongman base, and you're talking about competitors and fans slash spectators because they're one and the same. But there are corners of not everybody. I love a lot of the people, a lot of great people, a lot of good role models in there, but it's a big enough pattern that it's worth pointing out. There is a corner of that uh, environment that I am always frustrated with because it is exceedingly petty. It shows all of the insecurities of the personality types that strength sports tend to select for. You know, anybody who's ever looked at a big, overly muscled lifter and it's like, well, that dude's just insecure. You might be inclined to be like, oh, well, they're just shitting on, you know, all this hard work and dedication. But it's like, yeah, it's that. But yeah, we're also insecure. You know, we were the kids getting sand kicked in our face. It's the only reason a grown man spends, 15 hours a week in the gym away from his obligations and his family. Um, and it's fine. I think it's a great way to work through insecurities. But when that starts to fly in the face of basic sportsmanship, and you end up hearing a lot of stupid shit, and that's one of them. And it's from a lot of people that haven't paid their dues. Which, age of the internet, everybody has an opinion, and their opinion has to be heard. People get really excited about this new project that they have, this new hobby that they found, and they're really emotional and attached, and they're following people around, and then they start making really concrete statements about what the sport is or what it should be or where it should be going before they've been around long enough to have an opinion. People talk about growing the sport. It's a big one. And that one, I'm like, yeah, careful what you wish for, because the sport's grown immensely since I've been part of it. A lot of cool things came about because of that. A lot of shitty things came about because of that. Entry fees used to be $35. My entry fee to Worlds this year was almost 300. So give and take. I'm like, just infinitely growing the sport. The world's not going to be a better place because you have more people carrying around empty kegs in their driveway. Like what's the value here? What are you trying to get? What's the end goal? The one thing that chapped my ass, I was going to bat. I mean, I used to have a problem. I probably still have a problem in the comments engaging. The rule is you don't read the comments, right? And I violate that rule. I obsess. I'll be up at 2 a.m. Scrolling through. I'm like, what the fuck did you say?
I'm like, I need to figure out this motherfucker where he lives.
Yeah. And every time you click on their profile and they actually have their lifting videos up, you're like, you're done. No, but on the Facebook forum, because I had to leave it because there was so much ridiculous tribal clicky dumb shit that went on in these strongman Facebook groups. And a lot of great information was presented, a lot of really useful shit, but also a lot of like the worst of the internet. When Larry Wheels started competing, it was the brand new people, because in the, let's say 2000, I started 2006. So 2006 to 2012, I think strongman hit a pretty big spike. And then I think it's grown steadily over the last 10 years since then. So you're talking about what, 2016, 17, 18. I'm trying to think when Larry Wheels became well-known. Anyways, you're talking about these people that haven't been in the sport very long, maybe 4 or 5 years. It's just gotten popular. It's just become the thing. And you have this flood of people that are like triggered that people are talking about him getting a spot at a big show. And the one thing I saw over and over was like, well, he's got to earn his spot. He's got to pay his dues. It's like, oh, okay, well, you seem to think that the sport operates off a clean bracket system, or that everything operates under one federation and it's a very rigid procedural process to get to the top. And it's not. It's a shit show. It's a bunch of different people with different interests that kind of form relationships, but then kind of don't. There's a lot of drama, and people, do what they can, but then you can't even get the best guys in one place anyways. So people are like reaching to try and get different athletes in and have it be competitive, but still fill spots. And it's a mess. And as long as the sport's been around, it's benefited from the exposure. That's what strongman was. It was, let's take a bunch of guys that do other shit. Let's take football players, wrestlers, bodybuilders, and have them do all this shit and see. And it satisfies that kind of nerd question of who's the strongest, who's the best, who's the most useful in these situations. That's still what the sport is. And At the Arnold, gave spots to Brad Gillingham, to Andy Bolton. They Brian Siders, had to run a World's Strongest Man. The guy didn't start out in an amateur show, but you have a guy who was the all-time world record holder at the time, the 275s, and stands to give an immense amount of exposure to the sport that you're desperate to grow. And people are just crossing their arms, being like, well, he's not a real strong man. And it's like, you press a 170 log, shut the fuck up. And that's where my head goes. And that's why I always say, I wish there was a hierarchy system like martial arts in strength sports. I wish there weren't gyms, there were dojos. I wish you had to sign up. You had to go through the foundations class. You had to do the beginner shit, and you had to earn your way to touch the bigger equipment. And the sport would be better. People would be stronger. People would get more lessons, more life value out of this shit. And there'd be a lot less ticky-tacky, whiny bullshit on the internet.
Whew.
Yeah,
that's a mic drop moment.
I'm getting to the bottom of my reign. So,
shit, man!
White gummy bear got me charged up today.
Get him fired up.
I don't have an outlet to vent this. My channel doesn't give a shit about strongman. It's like the one thing that I'm like really knowledgeable about and have all these strong opinions about. And if I make a strongman video, it gets no fucking views. So it's like, you're getting all of it today.
Hey man, I'm all about it. Anytime you want to save it up, we'll just hop on and we'll just get it rolling. Bromley, I can't thank you enough for jumping on today. What sort of things, I know we had kind of talked about you're doing daily content on YouTube, like you've really amped up your production, which as someone who is doing that for a job, like, man, that is exhausting. The amount of work it takes to put a YouTube video out, just not even from just what are we going to talk about? How are you going to film it? What sort of things, you know what I mean? There's so many so many levels and just tasks to do per piece of content that you put out. For you to put things out on a daily, awesome. What other things are you kind of working on? Just kind of the floor is yours.
Yeah, that's the big thing right now. I've been doing it, talking to Zach Tellender. I was able to pick his brain when I interviewed him a month or so ago. And he lives with Chris Williams in Austin, who has a huge platform, has interviewed huge people. They're both very oriented, it seems, towards getting the most out of this model. And optimizing the system, not just putting out content and lifting weights, but actually being good influencers, whatever. So I took a lot from him. And then right after that, I was like, I need to up my content production. I was going 5-6 days a week, 5-6 videos a month. And I'm like, no, those are rookie numbers. I got to get those up. So I jumped it up to 8 to 10 a month. And then I was like, I think I got room to improve a little more. I'm like, why don't I do something every day? So anyways, I'm like 2 weeks in, seeing how many days in a row I can go, without having a break. And it's been great. So that's where most of my attention is. I've been supposed to drop a book for like the last year and a half. and it's the outline's done, like 70% of it's done. And I haven't sat down and committed to it. So I am tentatively working on getting my next one out. I wrote 3 within a year, and then I went like a year and a half and didn't write any. So I'm trying to get out of that rut. But that's really what it is. I mean, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, or if you want like more content, I do have a Patreon where I upload my training videos daily and I give commentary. And that's the easiest way to get in contact with me if you have any questions or if you have a video idea or something. And also, I just started doing like forum reviews. So Patreon members can upload a video and I can respond, react to their forum, make video compilations, whatever. So that's a little perk. But that's really about it. I mean, I'm living and dying for these daily posts right now. So we'll see how long before I go crazy and end up living in the woods.
Pissing in jars and doing all sorts of shit.
Get off the grid.
But all right, man. Well, again, I appreciate you jumping on. Bromley, you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. Truly appreciate your insight. Your just the information that you share, like I said, is super, super important to the strength community and coaches, athletes alike. So truly appreciate what you do. And yeah, guys, thanks for listening to this episode or watching this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for having me.